Okay, my name is Lawrence McGlynn, and you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, Vanessa Maria Graber will interview State Representative Chris Rabb about new legislation aimed at supporting Pennsylvania journalists. Denise Clay Murray will share why she'd like to be on Donald Trump's enemies list. And Lance Haber will explain Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke's plan for SEPTA. But before we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in City Council right now. And to do that, I'd like to bring on Denise Clay Murray. Denise. All right, Denise.
Hi.
So
yeah, there I am.
It's been an interesting week in City Council, and it's only Wednesday.
Well, that's one way to put it.
So I'm going to tell everybody what's going on, and then we'll see where we end up. So the way the home plan is structured is that the mayor and council have to agree on a resolution to determine how the first tranche of money will be allocated. All right. And in the original legislation, we're talking about 196 million, something like that, almost $200 million. With what City Council sent back, we're actually talking more like 277 million. So a little bit of a jump. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why. And Denise, correct me if I'm wrong here. But council, when they got the original number, said, okay, this is okay, but we feel like we can do a lot more in the beginning.
Right.
And one of the major concerns was, well, we have a lot of people living in poverty and deep poverty. And what we have to do is make sure those people are helped, that they get what they need. And you can see up here, I hope it's clear, I can't tell myself, but you can see that the numbers have changed for some of the key programs to the point where they're significantly more. And that's where the extra 80 or $90 million comes from. So, okay, right? Now, remember, they had the first hearing. There was going to be a second hearing. It got canceled because they just didn't have enough time to get the numbers together, which is fine, right? Why would you have a hearing if you just didn't have it all worked out yet? I get that. So they have the hearing yesterday. They put out these numbers. City Council does. Okay. All right. They pass it unanimously. And there we are. Except, Denise, somebody wasn't happy.
Oh, boy, wasn't she?
And I don't understand why. Because, well, just let me read the statement. And then we'll go back. This is from Mayor Parker. The resolution that City Council passed out of the Committee of the Whole today contained language that our bond lawyers have repeatedly advised would prevent the administration from being able to issue the bonds. That means homes are not being restored. It means homes are not being built or repaired. Throughout the legislative process, we have communicated to Council that amending the home program statement and budget in a way that created significant legal issues would mean that we will not be able to issue the bonds until next year, at the end of March at the earliest. To be clear, that means no shovels in the ground and no homes repaired through the Basic Systems Repair Program, which will run out of money in February. I am in discussion with Council President Johnson now as to possible next steps so we can get these bonds issued ASAP. The Parker administration remains ready and willing to work with Council on a $2 billion home plan to create, restore, or repair 30,000 units of housing. Every day without passage and agreement on a home plan is another day of delay for the people of Philadelphia. We need more housing, and we need it now. We need more existing homes repaired now. We need the One Philly mortgage established for new home buyers now. We need more funding for rental assistance now. We We need to leave no Philadelphian behind, and there's no time to waste. I have a problem with this statement, Denise.
Well, I can kind of tell you what the problem probably is. It mentions every kind of housing but affordable housing.
I have another problem, but I do have that
Okay.
problem with it. Here's my other
Mhm.
problem. Let me tell you this first. We need housing, and we need it now. We need more existing homes repaired now. I agree. But we needed it last year, too. So why wasn't this something the administration decided they were going to do last year as their first thing? If this is so important, Denise, which it is, why are we waiting till now, and why are we quibbling over the details? I can't understand this.
Well, first of all, I don't understand why someone is upset about getting more money to do something. I don't understand that. You asked to be able to borrow a little under $200 million. Council is authorizing you to borrow $277 million. I don't know about you, but that sounds like more money. And with more money, you can do more things. And where I've also had a problem with this is that you know that there are people on the list that have been trying to get their houses repaired for years and they don't have the money to do it. I would think that making sure that those people are taken care of first, or because Philadelphia is the second poorest city in America, I would think that taking care of the poor would not be, a bridge too far. But it seems like it's a bridge too far, and I don't get it.
Yeah. Well, you know who else doesn't get it? City Council President Kenyatta Johnson. So I'm going to read you his statement now, Denise. Philadelphia City Council members, our lawyers, and our housing experts strongly disagree with the suggestion that Council's actions on the new home resolution are the cause of delays in delivering housing resources to Philadelphia. Council's responsibility is not to rubber stamp legislation, but to ensure that any multi-billion-dollar public investment is legally sound and targeted to the Philadelphians who need it most. City Council unanimously voted to appropriate over $277 million in support of the mayor's home initiative, which is $82 million higher than the first home budget introduced on October 30th. Council members repeatedly raised concerns, directly and in good faith, about accountability, neighborhood equity, homeowner protections, and the long-term impact of the home legislation. Those concerns were raised early and consistently. Council's actions today strengthen the home resolution, not sabotage it. I heard clearly and directly from council members about critical issues that they wanted addressed in the first year home plan spending. Those concerns center on accountability, neighborhood equity, and most importantly, making sure that the deepest investments reach the poorest and most vulnerable Philadelphians. As council president, my number one responsibility will always be to fight for the interests of my members, and those concerns of council members and Philadelphians are fully reflected in this legislation. City council members want shovels in the ground. Council wants home repaired. Council wants families to stay in their neighborhoods. But council also refuses to rush into issuing $800 million in debt without ironclad legal protections and clear guarantees that the lowest income Philadelphians will benefit from the first round of home spending. Threatening residents with a shutdown of the basic systems repair program and assigning blame does not move this process forward. Collaboration and working together does. Important housing programs and city government will not be shutting down because of any delay in the first round of borrowing for the home program. There is already plenty of money in the city's current fiscal year 2026 $7 billion operating budget for these programs, so it is false to suggest that the service will stop operating. The city also has a $1.2 billion surplus from our fiscal year 2025 budget. Every member of City Council and I remain fully engaged with the administration to resolve remaining legal and policy issues swiftly and responsibly. City Council is preparing to introduce an amendment to the home bond ordinance as early as this week's council session to move quickly to ensure that funding for programs will be available as soon as possible. Our shared goal is, and always has been, to deliver a home plan that addresses various housing needs for all Philadelphians, especially those with the greatest need. Now, Denise, if I didn't know better, I would say the city council president and the mayor are from different parties. That's what this sounds like to me. Am I crazy for thinking that?
Well, no, actually, you're not. And sometimes with the mayor's office, and it's something that has happened with like the northwest section of the city more often than not. When you hear about the phrase middle neighborhood, and don't get me wrong, I grew up in a middle neighborhood in Jersey, but what people have to understand is that you can't prioritize middle neighborhoods over people who are poor, because it's the people who are poor that need the help first. And Council President Johnson, and what's weird is also the mayor came from circumstances where they understood that poor people need help, and people need to help them when they can. And I have to, like the whole hearing where they were doing public comment, the irony of that was you had Council Member Curtis Jones and this is after he voted yes on moving the council's version of the home program forward. He got up there and talked about, taxes on the middle class. The first of all, I didn't know America still had a middle class. I figured Ronald Reagan pretty much took care of that in the 80s. I stand corrected. But second of all, you can't focus only on them. You have to focus on everyone. And that has traditionally been like a blind spot for a lot of the people in City Hall. So the fact that this came up and it's being worked through the way it is significant. But again, when you're getting more money than you asked for to do something, I don't understand why you're mad. I really don't. It doesn't make sense to me.
The other thing I don't understand is if you're in the mayor's office, before city council has the hearing and marks up the amendments for the bill or the resolution, why don't you just call the council president? Why don't you call him and say, hey, what's going to happen? There's a couple things we're concerned about, and you work it out ahead of time. To me, that doesn't seem like a crazy idea.
Because that's usually what happens with this stuff. Yeah, that's usually what happens with this stuff. We usually, like, for example, with the whole stadium project, people knew how they were going to vote. Everybody had gotten in a room and decided how they were going to vote before the vote was taken. There were hearings, there were meetings, all of that stuff was going on. And you can only assume that some of that went on here, but and the most significant part of Council President Johnson's statement is where he reminds the mayor's office that council is not here as a rubber stamp. They are a co-equal branch of government. Because I think sometimes, just like in Washington with the president and Congress, I think that sometimes the executive branch forgets what the legislative branch is supposed to do.
Yeah. So
legislative controls the purse.
Yeah. So it's an interesting twist in this whole thing. I did not expect this to happen, but here we are. So we're going to keep following this. We're going to know more next week, and we'll know more probably tomorrow once we see what's happening in city council. So what we're going to do is keep an eye on it for you. There might be more. Hopefully we know more. It'll be in this week's newsletter, our Saturday newsletter. So right now what we're going to do is bring on Vanessa Maria Graber. Vanessa? How are you tonight?
Hello, I'm doing great.
Now, you spoke with State Representative Chris Rabb about what I think is a very important piece of legislation, very important to us all on the show.
That's right. Last week, Representative Chris Rabb, who represents the 200th legislative district in Northwest Philadelphia, introduced two bills in the Pennsylvania State House in the Communications and Technology Committee, and they both support local news in Pennsylvania. One bill is for a Pennsylvania Civic Information Consortium modeled after the one in New Jersey. And the second one is for a fellowship program for early and mid-career journalists, modeled very much like programs in New Mexico and in California. So I talked to him and asked him a little bit more about what motivated him to introduce this legislation, his views about accessing local news and the spread of disinformation, and what his vision was for the future of local news in Pennsylvania. Hello and welcome, Representative Chris Rabb. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
You recently introduced two bills to support local journalism in Pennsylvania. Can you tell us a little bit about those bills and why you decided to take action on these particular models and the issue of the local news crisis?
Sure. Thank you for that question. This is an important investment. So I've introduced two companion bills. The first would create and fund a Pennsylvania consortium. It would be a civic information consortium, which would be an independent and nonpartisan entity designed to distribute grants to local media outlets, journalistic outlets. And this is filling a significant void in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because there are a number of counties that have one or fewer local media outlets. And in a time of extraordinary media consolidation fueled by Wall Street's greed, it's important that we have trusted, hyper-local and diverse media outlets if we're going to sustain our democracy and strengthen it. So that's one bill. The other bill is highly related, and it basically creates a fellowship program to feed a pipeline of the next generation of journalists, so early career journalists, so that you have media outlets who have access to new journalists, so that we have the capacity we need to do the type of reporting that all communities deserve, particularly marginalized communities. And when I say marginalized communities, I don't necessarily just mean ethnic or urban. We're also talking about the overwhelming lack of representation in rural communities whose voices need to be lifted up. So that's basic overviews of the two related bills. And this is modeled off of legislation that has been enacted into law in a number of states. And I think it's important to see what other lawmakers are doing across the country and amplify and tweak what they do to make sure that Pennsylvania has the resources and opportunities in this field that it deserves.
That's right. The Civic Information Bill in New Jersey was passed back in 2018, later formed the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium, and that's awarded more than $10 million in grants for local news across the state. And there are fellowship programs in states like California and New Mexico and in others that have allowed journalists, especially early and mid-career journalists, to work in newsrooms where they otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity. You talked about rural areas in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a huge state. Of course, we're from Philadelphia, where we have a lot of news outlets. Can you say more about your concerns about the state of local news in Pennsylvania and being able to reach all of these communities, and also at the same time, the increased spread of disinformation?
Absolutely. a choice of one is no choice at all. And some counties don't even have any local independent news. That's a real problem because in any community, there's a diversity of experience and perspective that is not getting out. Their narratives are not being lifted up. Their priorities are not discussed. And they are essentially othered, and no one deserves to be othered, where it is an asterisk, it is a footnote, it is a brief reference to the concerns that are central to them in those communities. And everyone should feel centered through at least one entity whose job it is to have public accountability for those people. And so when you have rural communities where the only media influence is a national or multinational corporate influence, and they're being pummeled with misinformation and information that may not be the information they'd like to hear, and news specifically, that's a real problem, because then you have the rampant spread of disinformation and misinformation in ways that are deleterious to our democracy and to those communities. So making sure that every community has a diversity of representation is really important. That shouldn't just be for urban districts and for wealthy constituencies. That should be for everyone. If we can't have a thriving democracy or attempt to get to a thriving democracy without a independent and well-resourced fourth estate. So media is very important. In fact, it's so important that probably for 20 years, what I've been telling folks is, whatever your number one issue is, whether it's reproductive justice, whether it's climate action, whether it's LGBTQ issues, whether it's local business concerns, your second issue that you have to understand and prioritize is media democracy. Because anything you care about, no matter what the subject, it's influenced by the media landscape. And if that media landscape is dominated by 5 tech bros that basically control and surveil 95% of the content we consume, that's going to have a huge impact on the things we care about most. Oh.
Yes, as somebody who comes from a Spanish-speaking family and, a receiver of lots of international news, I can attest to the ways in which disinformation spreads on WhatsApp and YouTube and other social media, but especially when there's no local news outlet to combat the disinformation and clarify that. Of course, Pennsylvania has a Hispanic population that has grown immensely over the last 20 years. And the local news outlets that are bringing information to that community, continues to remain small. And so I think it's important as well to have multilingual news outlets giving information to all the different communities in Pennsylvania. As a legislator, you have lots of initiatives, votes, and things to promote. Can you tell me a little bit how you've worked with local media in the capacity of an elected official, and maybe how some of your colleagues also rely on local media in order to share information about what's happening in Harrisburg? News sometimes that doesn't reach even Philadelphia.
Oh, absolutely. So, as a state rep, I just represent four neighborhoods in Northwest Philadelphia. In fact, I represent fewer people than my district council member, who represents 150,000 people. So in many senses, even though I'm a state lawmaker, my base is hyperlocal. It's smaller than my own city council person, right? And so it's both local and state. So what does that mean? That means that the voices on the ground need to be amplified and need to be listened to. And some of the folks who amplify those voices and make sure that those local community issues are addressed our hyperlocal, media outlets, independent, or quote unquote ethnic outlets. So for over 20 years, I have been guest appearing on various shows on the only Black-owned talk radio show left in the state, WURD. And as someone who comes from a media family, my great-great-grandparents founded the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper almost 135 years ago, and it's still in our family today, and it's still an important voice as the corporatization of media flourishes. So I rely on them, and they access me to talk directly to their viewers, their subscribers, their listeners in a very symbiotic way, where I often feel more comfortable having those conversations than with corporate media that focuses more on profit maximization and clickbait than independent media. And so it's an important relationship that every public servant should cultivate. And if we can enact programs and policies and resources to help them, it's a win-win.
Well, yeah, and you certainly have made many appearances on the Hall Monitor, usually while I'm out in the field, and especially, I don't know if you recall, but I remember talking to you many times in 2020 during the pandemic and right after the uprisings that were happening, and people were out in the streets. And you were one of the few elected officials that were out in the streets, personally observing everything that was happening in Philadelphia. And I know during that time, especially when there is a critical need to distribute public health information, the press had to work very closely with elected officials and staffers at all levels of government. And so there is a relationship there. Oftentimes people don't know about. They like to think it's always adversarial, but in fact, many of the times we're working together along with community-based organizations to get that important information to our communities.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And
it's true because
disaster or emergency, we're going to have to work together again.
Right, because there's the legislative and policy aspect of this work. There's the public advocacy part where it may not be a particular bill, but we're lifting up a topic, and it could be, racial justice or what have you, right? And then there's the more not informational, but like resource focused, like here are resources that you need to know that are available through the government, or here are opportunities, here are events where the nature of a public servant's connection to media is more about information sharing as opposed to persuasion, right? So if you believe your viewers, your listeners could benefit from this event or these resources, you share it, right? And it's not about promoting a candidacy or campaign or ideological perspective, but this is the nonpartisan, constituent, services-oriented part of the job that's super important. And that's definitely one way that elected officials and government can work closely with folks in media.
Yeah, for example, these recent changes to SNAP, right? And then some of the funds were distributed by the governor, but not all. And so a lot of people were left with questions about what Pennsylvania is doing with these benefits. And that was another occasion where we talked to elected officials to find out information. And in fact, many of you were putting information out on your social media and in newsletters to give people the latest information about what was happening with SNAP benefits. And I suspect as programs are added and programs are cut, that we'll continue to have to give people updated information as these things continue to change, as well as, changes in immigration policy, which is another thing that, it's like always in question and always needing to give the most updated information. Representative Rabb, I want to end by sharing the long-term vision. Free Press has an essay called Media 2070, where they challenge people to think about the media in the year 2070. And that has largely to do with media reparations and changing, fundamentally changing the media landscape. What's your vision for media in Pennsylvania? And maybe not going all the way to 2070. I don't know if we'll be around by then, but maybe
Yeah, I'll be 100.
Yeah. Let's talk about the next 10 years. In New Jersey, the organizing started around 2015 in order to pass that New Jersey Civic Information Law. And so, it's been 10 years. And now there are many new local newsrooms serving the community that are supported by this funding. What do you hope Pennsylvania will look like in 10 years?
I would love to see a media landscape where the dominant media outlets are not controlled or influenced by Wall Street, and that the diversity of the ownership and the content it reflects the diversity of the Commonwealth, and that the business models, that the organizational structures are in alignment with certain communal values. So, for instance, worker co-ops, consumer co-ops, producer co-ops of media generation and news would be extraordinary. Relationships with organized labor, with any number of fields where we haven't seen this kind of meaningful partnership could be extraordinary. Facilitating with public institutions. There's so much like creativity in this space with the appropriate resources and opportunities. And with this, when this bill is enacted into law, specifically around the consortium, Civic Information Consortium, I'd like to see a heck of a lot more than $10 million go towards it and towards the creation and expansion of existing entities and creating new ones that will allow for the type of diversity of expression and news coverage and information that we don't currently benefit from because of the broligarchy, basically, where we can have our spaces that are not infected by corporate greed and bigotry, and the disease of gosh, there's so many to choose from. Basically, corporate greed and telling a very narrow narrative that does not benefit the public good.
Thank you so much for sharing your vision and information about the two bills. Representative Chris Rabb represents the 200th Legislative District out of Northwest Philadelphia. And you can find more information about the bills on your website, I imagine, and on Free Press's website, freepress.net. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing more information about your passion for local news.
My pleasure.
Well, it's nice to hear a local politician be on our side for once. We're not used to that, Denise.
It's radical in its concept, I'm sure.
Yeah. Now, Denise, you are not looking to be judged by your friends. You are looking to be judged by your enemies.
At this moment, yes.
Tell me why.
Well, because if you remember last week, we went to an event with one of the commissioners of the FCC. And one of the things that she pointed out is that right now the White House is trying to silence dissent and using media corporations and anything else it can to do that. So imagine my surprise when a friend of mine sent me the link to the media offenders list. Now, apparently the White House has taken an actual web page on the White House website, the whitehouse.gov website, is actually dedicated to media offenders. Observe. I call it the list every journalist should aspire to. Now, this is the front page of the media offenders section of the whitehouse.gov website, which says that, these are news organizations that have been misleading, biased, and that they're exposing them. The italics are theirs, not mine. And it charges news outlets with basically quoting the president directly, but not providing what they believe is the proper context, or misrepresenting Trump, or my personal favorite, practicing left-wing lunacy. Now, I don't know exactly what that is, but apparently, and if you read my column in the newsletter this week, there was one example I gave of an Associated Press story in which the reporters from the Associated Press pointed out that the White House's contention that Tylenol contributes to autism has been disproven in a study, but instead of taking the word of people who actually did research on this, they doubled down. Mm-hmm. Now, the only issue that I can see in these stories, because I'm a geek like that, I sat down and read as many stories, as many things on this website as I could. It's like a 4 or 5 page website that has lists of things that media have done that have offended the White House. And the only thing I can see is that these stories don't take what the White House says as gospel. In fact, there are some organizations that are repeat offenders. Like, they really don't like anything that comes out of the Washington Post, despite the fact that basically Jeff Bezos has asked the Post to completely capitulate to them. They don't really like much from Politico. They're not really fond of the New York Times. And all of these news organizations have on some level bent the knee to the White House. So I'm like, okay. And then I read why they had issues with them. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying to myself, all I see here are people who are practicing independent, fact-based journalism. In many cases, particularly CNN, they are playing a clip with Donald Trump, in some cases live, where you're sitting there listening to him say some of the stuff he says in real time. So, obviously they don't like direct quotes. I don't know what's up with that, but they obviously don't like direct quotes. So my new mission in life, and I try not, I've accomplished a lot in my career as a journalist, but I have decided that my new goal in life is to get on this enemies list. That is my goal. My goal is to so offend this White House by being a fact-based independent journalist. If you've ever seen the Bugs Bunny cartoon where they say that rabbits are harmless and Bugs Bunny goes out of his way to be public enemy number 1, including cutting Florida off from the rest of the country.
Not a bad idea.
That's kind of my goal now. My goal is to be the Bugs Bunny of journalism so that I can get on this list. And if you're a journalist that does independent fact-based reporting, that should be your goal as well.
Agreed. Agreed, Denise. I'm not surprised by any of this.
No.
This is something that Richard Nixon would do if he was alive today. And in the digital age, none of it surprises me. And it's not going to surprise me when they keep taking this farther and farther and farther. You know, I don't see this stopping.
And that's why what Representative Rabb is trying to do is so significant. Why the program in New Jersey is so significant. Why, programs like ours are so significant, because there is so much pressure on the part of media outlets to not tell the complete story of what's going on in this White House, because the whole idea is to stifle dissent. And to the White House, fact-based independent journalism is a form of dissent. And it really shouldn't be, because under the Constitution, the First Amendment says you're not supposed to make any laws or even attempt to make any laws that mess with freedom of the press. And you get the feeling that as, more and more media outlets or more media corporations decide they're going to do what the White House wants, that it is going to definitely impact freedom of speech. Like, for example, AT&T just announced that they were getting rid of all of their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs because they're about to go to the FCC and try to get more broadband companies. And if you leave this particular segment a hall monitor without knowing anything else, whenever you hear of a media company getting rid of all of its diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, or getting rid of all of its, diverse anchors or reporters or any of those things, ask yourself this question: what is the ask? Because right now, Warner Brothers is up for sale, which includes HBO and Warner Brothers film studios and stuff. That's up for sale. And you have several companies, including Philadelphia's own Comcast, vying for it. Keep an eye on what they're about to ask the FCC for, because that will tell you whether or not they're going to completely decide that the Constitution and the First Amendment no longer applies to them.
Right. I mean, and we see that all over the Trump administration, the bribes, extortion from the president to media companies, and really just anything, but media companies in general. And it's really been despicable. And it's kind of shocking that you don't see this more and more in the mainstream media, that this is getting reported on, but they're afraid that they'll have FCC problems, which they will, should they keep going in this direction. So it leaves it up to the smaller outlets like us, even though that's not what we do. It's not our charge to really focus on the national issues in so much as they, are applicable to what happens here locally. We don't really do it, but we have to now, because there's a big gap between some of the things that are happening and what's actually being reported. And it's really kind of amazing. Denise, it's December now. The year's almost over. We're going into 2026. The stakes are going to be higher.
Yes.
Midterm elections coming up. And it's strange to say that because it's 11 months from now, but we're going to be in that season soon enough. I don't see Trump getting any more sane. I think we're just going the opposite way. What do you think how bad is it going to get for the media going into 2026?
I would be less concerned about how it's going to impact the media, then I would be the fact that right now the Supreme Court is trying to decide whether or not the gerrymandering that seems to be a part of every state's calculus these days is in fact legal. The gerrymandering thing in Texas has been put on hold, as is California. And there are lawsuits being filed to stop it, stop both of those things. While I would, if there is a media concern connected to that, I would be concerned about how those things are covered, or if they're covered at all. And that's important because it could literally affect the right to vote for a lot of people. It's not being talked about in Pennsylvania yet, but anyone who's followed Pennsylvania politics will tell you, if there is a bad idea out there and it hasn't worked anywhere else, Pennsylvania will indeed try it.
That's right. All right. And Denise, people can find you and me on WURD tomorrow for City Council Live starting at 10 a.m. So go to your dials and listen to us there. And Denise, thank you so much. And we will see you next week on the show. And now we'd like to bring in Lance Haver, talk a little bit about what's going on with transit. Lance, how are you?
I'm fine, but Denise made me feel old. That was the Nixon list that people wanted to be on. People in my generation were somewhat embarrassed if they weren't on the enemies list that Nixon kept.
Right.
So now Denise is going to do whatever she can to get on the good list. Maybe that's like a corollary of John Lewis's Good Trouble, good list. But I wanted to talk a little bit today about what's happening with the Transit Access Fund. And I'm going to call up, if I can, my slideshow. Thank you. So this is something that has an attempt to talk about what do we do for people who are desperately poor, who don't have enough money really to go look for jobs, who don't have enough money to go get their GEDs, who don't have enough money to get to the doctor to help their health care, or even to go to houses of worship or visit friends and take care of family members who may need some help. So everybody needs some ability to get out of their home to take care of very basic needs. SEPTA over the last 12 months has raised their fares by 30%. It's shocking to many of us, but it is true. One-way fare is now $2.90, almost $6 for a round trip. The minimum wage in Pennsylvania remains at $7.25. So while almost all of the transit advocates and almost all of the Philadelphia delegation to Harrisburg, with the exception of Senator Vincent Hughes, supported SEPTA's 30% fare hikes, now those same advocates are saying, well, we have to make sure SEPTA is affordable. And the solution has been that they're supporting what Council Member O'Rourke is doing, which is developing a transit access fund. Now, what the fund would do, and it's a two-step process. One, it's a bill in City Council that would require a charter change, and that would be voted on by all the citizens. And the charter change would set aside not 5%, not 1%, but 0.5% of Philadelphia's general fund to serve as the Transit Access Fund. That money would be used to offer zero fare initiative, much like what's being discussed in New York. And Seattle for many years had a free fare program in its center city area. Now, it's not really the same because of how Seattle structures itself, but there have been a number of attempts to look at public transit and say, we ought to have a free zone. Bizarrely enough, in Pennsylvania, the only transit system that has a free zone is in Erie, Pennsylvania. And every Saturday, Erie has a free center city district. And it's to bring shoppers, it's to bring people to the arts, it's to try and keep their center city alive, which would increase the property values and increase the city's ability to raise money through taxes. So any resident who is at 150% of the federal poverty level or below, and that's $32,150 for a family of four, could qualify. Now, if the bill is enacted at 0.5%, it would raise an estimate $34 million, enough to get 60,000 people passes. Now, I want to be really clear about this. This is a tremendous step forward. And I think that we ought to look at what Council Member O'Rourke is doing as really advancing the whole discussion about allowing people to go to see their doctors, to get GEDs, to go to school. This is really incredibly helpful. But because the Philadelphia delegation, Senator Saval and others, have been completely silent while SEPTA's raised the fares, there are 300,000 people who ride SEPTA in the city. 60,000 would get help. The other 240,000 wouldn't get anything out of this program. Now, I'm not suggesting that doesn't mean that this is a valuable program and something that we should ignore. I'm just saying we shouldn't, like the housing discussion, we should take care of the desperately needy, but we should also look at the people who are struggling in again, the question of what's a middle class and what's not. But we should do what we can for everybody, not just those who are desperately poor. Now, I know that there's going to be some discussion about, well, why should we help, quote unquote, those people? And in this case, to be very straightforward, the majority of the people who ride SEPTA are people of color. The majority of people who ride the city transit division are African Americans. That is true. That it's not only African Americans, but it is primarily African Americans who are riding the buses and the subways and the L and the subway surface cars. And I think anyone who rides SEPTA, that's not a surprise. But here's what may be the surprise. Many people are going to say, well, why, what is this that we're giving money to help people ride SEPTA? Well, if you take a quick look at the city budget, what's really amazing is not how little we give to help poor people, but how much we give to help wealthy people. So I did a real quick view. First is we built the stadiums for the Phillies and the Eagles. Now, Jeffrey Lurie, we keep getting told, is a billionaire many times over, really sharp business person, made a great investment, puts good teams. I know that Denise's husband, Chris, is a fan, although he likes Baltimore more, right? But anyway, I know he goes, he watches, he's enjoyed. I think most of us enjoy, even if we don't go, enjoy having a team where we can have a community of discussion. But we gave him over $300 million. In addition, every year the city of Philadelphia is obliged to pay off those stadium bonds, $25 million, as well as $10.4 million, just to maintain the area. Now, Governor Shapiro in this year's budget didn't get additional money for the Eagles, but he wants it. Now, I know some people can say, well, there's some amusement taxes and there's this tax and that tax that offsets it. Well, that is absolutely true, but low-income people shopping pay sales tax. Going to school, getting to jobs, pay taxes. So it's not clear who pays more taxes, rich people or poor people. On average, it's poor people who pay more taxes, more real estate taxes through rent, more sales tax, and all of those things. But that's not the only way we help rich people in the budget. One of the really shocking things, I think, is that in Philadelphia, we all know it's a wage tax, but we often don't think what that means. It's a wage tax, not an income tax. So if you make your living by speculating, by selling stocks and bonds, by buying up real estate, keeping it vacant, and then flipping it, if you do those things, you don't have wages, you have investment money. Now, there is a school income tax that's supposed to collect, quote unquote, investment income or unearned income. But we never get a report. We don't know how well it's being collected. We don't know how well it's done. But even if 100% of the people who owed on the school income tax paid it, it wouldn't come close to capturing the money that the speculators get away with in profits that are untaxed. Because the school income tax, I'm going to say this slowly, the school income tax doesn't tax capital gains if you hold it for more than 6 months. So the federal government under Republicans, under Democrats, and even under Trump, whatever you want to call him, we tax capital gains at 15% up. The city of Philadelphia doesn't tax capital gains. That's how much a gift we give to the wealthy people. If you buy a house, you hold it for 6 months and a day and then flip it, you don't pay any taxes on that income. You buy stocks, you hold it for 6 months and a day, you make money, you don't pay any taxes on that. You go to work every day, 6 months, you pay taxes. 12 months, you pay taxes. You never get the break. But if you're an investor, you get breaks. And that's not the only breaks we give wealthy. We have now, as Denise reported, I think 2 weeks ago, 20-year tax abatement for areas that are distressed, which apparently now means all of Center City. The city of Philadelphia has 82 designated opportunity zones which offer tax abatements. And we have a public, I'm going to try not to laugh at this. We have a public partnership with the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation. This wording comes from their webpage. PIDC, Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, is Philadelphia's public-private economic development corporation, a nonprofit venture between the city of Philadelphia and the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. What do? They offer grants to businesses, they offer low-income loans to businesses, and they offer interest-free loans to business. So the next time somebody says we can't afford or we shouldn't help people get to the doctor or get a chance to get their GED or go to apply for work because we don't want to subsidize them, I want to ask them, why do you want to subsidize the people who make their living keeping houses vacant in our neighborhoods and then flipping them? Why do we want to subsidize the gamblers on the stock market? Why do we want to subsidize these people who are in these tax-free zones? And so, yes, there's a balance. There may be a reason to do all that type of thing, but there definitely is a reason to support Councilmember O'Rourke's Transit Action Fund that would make sure people have a way of getting where they want to go. Transportation is one of the things that should be protected. Other cities have found ways of doing it. It was a big issue in the New York mayoral election. Sometimes people say, oh, free something. I guess people don't do enough research to know Erie has a free Saturday. Why don't we have it? Because we don't have the vision to do it, because we don't have a state delegation that wants to talk about affordable SEPTA. But we will have, at least if Councilmember O'Rourke is successful, a transit action fund to take care of the least of us. Now, it's not my faith, but I do know Matthew. You know, whatever we do for the least of us, we do for us. So that's my report. Doesn't solve all the problem, doesn't solve even the majority of the problem, but it does solve a part of the problem.
Well, and Lance, you bring up a good point, because when the Democrats have seemed to make affordability their issue going into 2026. But when we talk about it, I don't hear a lot about what we're going to do about it. I just hear, oh, it's a problem.
Well, as somebody who's been covering how unaffordable water bills are and gas bills are and electric bills are, it always makes me wonder, do the people who talk about this not understand that the city owns the water department, that the city owns the gas works? Do they not understand that the city purposely sends out reassessors to increase the assessment of the house so the council members don't have to have a backbone and vote for a tax increase?
Yeah.
I'm going to report in 2 weeks because I have my second hearing for my own personal place, so I can expose how the tax review board met. And I had 2 people come in today to review my house, to look at it. Now, on paper, it's a 3-bedroom. In reality, they're 2 bedrooms. What happens is, apparently, when the realtors try and sell things, all of us who have been fortunate enough to buy a place know realtors kind of exaggerate. So I live in a neighborhood called Hawthorne. According to the realtor, I live in Bella Vista. I have a 2-bedroom place. You could put a sleeping sofa in a room in my place. I guess that's what they call the 3rd bedroom. But for most of us, if you can't close the doors and have some privacy, it doesn't really count as a bedroom. So there are all these things we have control over as a city government that we don't use, but instead we like to talk about.
I just want to mention one thing really quick. Today, the water department and the gas works came in for 2 separate bills, and nobody asked about rates. No council member brought that up, which I thought was surprising. So we're going to have to leave it there. We'll be back next week on Hall Monitor for more left-wing lunacy.
Get on that list, Denise.